Hey everyone, welcome to another G News update. Well, this morning the Prime Minister, Christopher Luxon, appeared on the breakfast show and was asked by Jenny May about what we're going to do about applying sanctions to Israel. Well, what did he say? Well, he said that we already have. So he was copying the rhetoric that had been repeated in Parliament last week by Winston Peters, that New Zealand had already posted some sanctions against Israel, and that these were about a couple of extremist politicians, and that they were also applying to extremist settlers who were breaking international law and settling on land in the West Bank. However, when it came to trade, Christopher Luxon downplayed the amount of trade, and he used the size of the amount of trade and the trade relationship between New Zealand and Israel as a excuse really for us to take no action at all on trade, to do nothing, to kind of send the signal that genocide was okay, that we're not going to do much more than we've already done. So we weren't going to do the little that we could do because he told Jenny May that it was basically zero trade that we do with Israel at all. Anyway, that all sounded very, very convincing until you look into the facts, and the facts are that growth in trade between Israel and New Zealand has been growing at about 13.5%, that's 13.5% over the last 5 years. And at the moment, there's probably in excess of $200 million that's traded in exports from Israel into New Zealand. So things are improving in terms of Israel's exports to New Zealand by about, something like 13% a year. And that means that by now we're probably sitting around $205 million of exports. Those exports from Israel to New Zealand that Christopher Luxon won't do anything about, they include things like telecommunications equipment and some heavy machinery that's used in industry. But it also includes other things like diamonds and other goods. So Christopher Luxon's not going to do anything about it, and he's going to use a big excuse that $200 million is just not enough to do anything about, and he won't take any action, and that trade will continue to grow. One of the other interesting facts that Christopher Luxon didn't mention when he was making excuses for not taking any sanctions further against Israel, even when there's a genocide underway, was that, well, in New Zealand, we've got Fonterra, and Fonterra's got some big, business relationships with Israel that have been in place for, I don't know, maybe since the early 2000s. And Fonterra is really important to the National Party. So you can see that there's lots of selfish reasons why New Zealand isn't going to take out any further action, or sanction when it comes to trade or business relationships, because basically the profits and the revenue, they are more important than human life. They're more important than children that are starving or people that are being shot at when they're starving and trying to get food. This is also the case, for a lot of people that vote for ACT and for National. They believe that Palestinian lives are worthless and that the only lives that matter are a few hostages that now remain. Christopher Luxon was using rhetoric this morning that's rehearsed and memorized, and we know that because he kept referring about 200 to 251 hostages. But as we know, most of those hostages have already been exchanged, and the ones that are remaining, they're basically possibly being starved to death by Israel as they prevent food and aid reaching everybody, including their own people in Israel, from reaching them at the moment. So there's a lot of reaction from people on the internet that don't know anything about what's going on, trying to say that anybody that has any compassion or care about the babies that are being slaughtered and killed, their mothers and families, the senseless, disproportionate bombing, that's all justified. You see, it's all justified because of Hamas being termed a terrorist organization. But what about state-sanctioned terrorism, where you see hundreds of thousands of people, maybe, just basically being uplifted. You see them being displaced, you see them being murdered slowly over time. That's state-sanctioned terrorism, but we don't call it that. And Christopher Luxon is very, very, careful just to recite the spin that says, this group over here that kill civilians, they are terrorists, but this group, much bigger, that kill more civilians, they're not terrorists. They're not state-sanctioned terrorists. There's no terrorism from the state here, according to Christopher Luxon. And I think everyone that votes for National probably agrees with that simplistic sort of deception from one hand to the other. But that's the kind of thing we're seeing on Television New Zealand this morning. And credit to Jenny May for bringing up the topic after such a huge demonstration of the public sentiment and public will in New Zealand yesterday in Auckland, where it's probable that there was over 30,000 people that hit the streets, that came from all over the place, to make it clear to the government that them sitting on their hands and saying, oh, well, we've already done everything we could, and $200 million plus of exports into New Zealand from Israel is zero. They'd better wake up, because there's an election coming and they're not going to be in power if they're going to continue lying like this. So that was good to see from Television New Zealand, that they actually talked about this huge protest back home. Sue O'Neill, this happened in our backyard, this huge protest happened here in New Zealand. And although I know that there's probably been more coverage about a protest in the United Kingdom and more coverage and focus on Brian Tamaki than there has on Voices from Palestine, that's just who we are in New Zealand. Quite prejudiced, quite influenced by the rhetoric that comes out of the Trump administration, and we're very, very careful not to tread on any toes. Earlier this morning, I mentioned that Audrey Young had written an article in the New Zealand Herald about what Cabinet needs to decide regarding the state of Palestine and New Zealand's position on it. And this was basically a short list of about 4 options, which went from basically supporting everything that 147 other nations in the United Nations have already decided that they support a Palestinian state right now. And then there were other options like those that are agreed with some conditions that are about immediate changes, like Hamas not being part of a future government. And those are the kind of short-term conditions that we've seen Australia agree to, we've seen the United Kingdom agree to, we've seen Canada agree to it, we've seen France agree to it. But New Zealand, no, we're still considering things because we're a bit captured in New Zealand. Other options included just sort of being a little bit more specific, but not very much, and staying vague about when would it be a good time, because remember, the government's been saying it's not a matter of if, it's about when, but it's just not now, is it? It's any time but now, it's not today. Other nations have already done the work. They've already made it very easy for the government to look at. The government can see all of the reasons why 147 other nations and all of these major nations have recently changed place. But still, we've got Christopher Luxon out there on Radio New Zealand this morning, no, not Radio New Zealand, Television New Zealand, on Television New Zealand, saying it's very, very complicated. It's very complicated. It's very, very complex. It's very complicated. It needs weeks and months of judicious analysis, even though it's already been thought through by so many other nations on planet Earth, because when a baby is actually starving to death, it's not simple, that we should actually intervene. If a baby is starving to death, maybe hundreds, maybe thousands, maybe tens of thousands of children are being starved to death, then that's complicated. Now, the truth of the matter is that it's not complicated. It's very, very straightforward, and it's very simple, and it's clear. And the real problem that is complicated is Christopher Luxon has no leadership power over Davey Boy or Winston Peters, and they are holding New Zealand captive. And we're having to do this in a little cabinet meeting where they're going to squabble over some of those light, watered down, vague kind of positions where it's not a matter of if, but when, but not today. Possibly, just a little bit tighter around that vagueness, but certainly not what Australia's already done, certainly not what France, Canada, the United Kingdom have all come to decide. That could have been done weeks and weeks ago. We had all the research done. They'd already done the legwork for us, but still we stall, we wait, we make up excuses because the ACT Party and Davey Boy, who basically support Zionism, who have huge donors that support Zionism in Israel, basically have some self-serving interests that get in the way of things like supporting moves to stop the starving and killing and mass murder of children, of genocide. So Davey boy, this is the people that vote for ACT. You're complicit basically here. There's no two ways about it. Like I mentioned yesterday, 86% of 500 genocide scholars who are academic experts on genocide agreed that all of the conditions are met here for a genocide. We're witnessing a genocide and we're saying it's complicated. So that's the government that we've got in New Zealand. Shame on them. Shame on this government. They've got to go. In other news this morning, we also heard that there's going to be partial strikes this week, starting today with Year 12 and Year 13 students, and the teachers who are secondary school teachers are striking because they want more support from the government to support our students. Our students basically deserve better than the government's prepared to pay for when you've got sort of a neoliberal austerity going on, and we're not prepared to invest in our teachers properly. So we're going to shortchange them, and we'll bring in someone like Brian Roach, Sir Brian to some, and he'll say, you've got a good offer that doesn't really compensate you for all of the changes. There's a once-in-a-generation change around NCEA. There's massive new changes to the curriculum, and the teachers, the PPTA, are arguing that we need more support and recognition of all that extra work. And we've also been underpaid for quite a while. And with inflation running hot as well, they've fallen behind. Negotiations have been stalled by the government, and here's the government trying to pin what the unions and the teachers are saying here today back onto them and turn all of the parents and students against their teachers. Well, that's not going to wash. So anyway, the news was that there's going to be partial strikes today, Tuesday, Wednesday and Thursday for different years through the week of secondary students. And good on them, I think, for standing up to the neoliberal government that's just trying to shortchange people. We've had enough of that. We can support our teachers much better than this. In other news, we also caught wind of the fact that Brad from The Flat reckons that tomorrow some news is going to come out about the price of goods that are food. And he's picking that we're going to see that global commodity prices for butter have fallen around about 2%, but we haven't seen any movement from the supermarket duopoly. The price of butter remains the same in New Zealand, as farmers on average are getting $400,000 each in the pocket. Woohoo! Dairy farmers next year from the bonanza, while the rest of the country is suffering and people are leaving in droves. People don't have jobs. People can't find a paying job that will cover things like the huge National Party water bills that have generated because they can Three Waters. The enormous rate bills that are coming in future years because we can Three Waters. The power bills this winter that have gone up so much, particularly for industry. Industry power price has gone up like 20% because of privatisation, because right-wing governments believe in privatisation. And privatisation of the electricity sector has led to us placing the dividends for the shareholders before the consumers. And so our prices go up every year to keep making profits more important than running the country or running businesses. So it becomes impossible to run a business in this country. And what has the government done in the 2 years that they've been in? Well, they've done nothing. They're doing a review, they're sitting around, they're paying some consultants, but they haven't made any decisions, and there's no coherence, there's no direction, we don't know. And it's the same with climate change and methane targets, and none of their plans make any sense. They're not coherent. Yet we've got people like Atlas Luke at the Post saying this government is more coherent than the opposition, who is against all of these things in principle. So that's the media basically have these people who are very influential that are putting us crook all the time. Again, it all goes back to these think tanks and who's got the money, the big end of town, and what suits them, not this country. Now, speaking of this country, the scene behind me is of Owhiti Bay. That's this bit here. This bit here, Owhiti Bay, is sort of on the north eastern side of Waiheke Island, and it's not accessible by road. I'm up on the road that leads out to the gun emplacements out the back of the island here, and it's quite windy, and there's roadworks going on, and all sorts of bulldozers were parked up to me just a minute ago, so I couldn't do this, so I had to move on down the road to this spot. But this beach here is a very beautiful beach. It could arguably be one of the most beautiful beaches, and you can only get there by boat, really, because you can't go across this. This is all private land. There's huge sections of this part of the island that are privately owned by billionaires, people that are very, very wealthy. And over the years, there's been a long history of this road here that I'm standing on being closed to the public for private interests. So this is what happens when wealthy people snap up land. The public gets denied enjoying the coastlines, going to places that are beautiful. And, you know, it's actually only very few people that get to enjoy this. So New Zealand First voters are voting for this kind of thing because they believe that wealthy foreigners should buy up New Zealand. That's what New Zealand First believe. So these sort of places like this around the coastline, New Zealand First voters all believe they shouldn't be allowed to go to those places, nor should their children. So they keep voting for Winston, who says, oh, don't worry about it, it's only 1%. It's just these beautiful places. I mentioned Radio New Zealand before. Radio New Zealand had Ingrid Hipkiss interview Christopher Luxcon this morning, and instead of asking anything about Palestine or Israel or genocide, she asked, what about those All Blacks? What's it going to take to turn things around with the All Blacks? That was the first and most important thing to Radio New Zealand. And then Radio New Zealand quibbled and squabbled over things like, I don't know, you know, whether or not we're getting the outcomes that we need to get from the money that's spent over in Whānau Ora. And so it was about bashing and picking on Maori, basically. And Christopher Luxcon saying, spending money is not important, just the outcomes. Well, that outcomes, you know, thing, that rhetoric about outcomes, what have we seen? What are the outcomes so far that we have seen from Christopher Luxcon's government? Well, we've seen all those 73,400 people leave the country permanently. We've seen all of this massive unemployment. We saw that they inherited declining inflation. It was going down when they got into government, but we've seen this outcome of them blaming the previous government for everything that they have done in the last 2 years. They have led us into one of the deepest recessions under National's watch that we've experienced since the 1990s. So talking about outcomes is pretty perilous stuff. And also talking about the big spending, because this is exactly what we see from the National Party. We hear Christopher Luxon and we hear Chris Bishop saying $7 billion of infrastructure projects are going to have spades in the ground before Christmas. So that's about spending, not outcomes, right? And then in the next breath, he's like, it's not about spending, it's about outcomes. So which one is it? Well, what it is it's hypocrisy, right? And it's not being called out. So I'm calling it out here at Owhiti Bay on Waiheke Island. This beautiful beach here has a story personally for me. My brother and I came out here when we were about teenagers, maybe 15 or 16. We had a big flag and a beer because we weren't allowed to drink beer. And it got us over the hill over there really fast. We drank most of the beer, maybe half of it. And then we got down to this bay and we camped down here. We went across this land and we set up camp, but the beer had gone hot in the hot summer sun. So I had the great idea of tying it to a rope and throwing it out into the sea out here. But the trouble was, when we pulled the rope in, salt water had got into the beer, so we didn't have anything to drink. So anyway, we had this great night, but we ended up drinking from a stream over here, which actually had, I think, some poisonous feces or something in it from the cow paddocks around here. And so I got a light dose of hepatitis after that. I kind of went all yellow and jaundice, and in the end I took about a year off school. But wow, I'm okay these days, but I don't really give blood, that kind of stuff. So that's the story of Owhiti Bay for me. But I've been back many times by boat when I used to have a little fishing boat when I could afford it. These days I can't afford that kind of thing. At the moment, Vicky still doesn't have a job, so thank you very much for your support. I'll just leave this little note here. If you want to help G News to keep telling these stories about Palestine and genocide and the government, then by all means, please help us out. Yeah, so we're continuing to go backwards here at G News, and we don't want to. So what else? Well, there are quite a number of other stories and they're all flying out of my head at the moment. So that'll probably do for today. We're out here. I've got to get back and edit this. And then there's plenty more to talk about. But in general, we're basically seeing Brian Tamaki being more important, the All Blacks being more important the story about a campsite and what we're going to do about an inquiry into the Tom Phillips saga and how he got away with things for 4 years. We're going to hear about things like, how now families are all going to be able to go and visit people in hospitals for 24 hours. And that's because Simeon Brown and Christopher Luxcon will not fund health properly. So families are going to keep watch on people because we don't have enough nurses. We don't have enough trained people anymore in our hospitals. So in come the families. Now that's great from a cultural point of view, but it basically comes down to the fact that we're underinvesting in health, that this government's got to go. Our health is under attack. They're trying to privatise it. Simeon Brown's not telling any of you how much money they've spent on all those private operations. He's boasting how many operations they've done, how they've exceeded this very low target they set for themselves. And now we're very successful because we did that. But he's not telling you the costs, how much it costs, right? That's a secret. That's commercially sensitive. That's the kind of bullshit that we're all putting up with while there's a genocide going on and there's a huge protest, but we're hearing more about protests in the UK than we are, and Brian Tamaki, than we are about Palestine. So free Palestine, free Palestine, free Palestine. Palestine will be forever. Christopher Luxcon needs to grow a spine. Chloe was right. All those tens of thousands of people, maybe 30,000 of them yesterday were right. Grow a spine, Christopher Luxcon. Stop saying that we can't sanction Israel. Stop your bullshit. There's $200 million we could start with today. And why is their ambassador still here? It's not worth talking to them, is it? They're not going to change their minds. So that's all from me today. Have a great day and we'll talk to you all again soon.
Welcome to G News, the good news.